I didn't quite know what to expect when I was first assigned to the Iliad at university. I was just a 19-year-old girl, and it was my first ever ancient epic poem. I wasn't really looking forward to it. The Odyssey appealed to me more. It has adventures and monsters and things like that, whilst a poem entirely about the last 2 months of a war really didn't appeal to me. I went in rather naively expecting the famed imagery that I was familiar with, and I'm sure you are too, the Trojan horse and the death of Achilles, particularly being shot in the Achilles heel. But I learned out the hard way that neither of those details feature in the work, despite the magnitude of their cultural significance. And of course I expected to feel bored and exhausted, rather disinterested by the gory details and lists of battles and deaths and so on. And yet, I wasn't. In fact, I rather loved it, and I still hold it as one of my favourites out of the two. I can't really pick between the Odyssey and the Iliad. So, in this video, I want to help encourage those of you who were a bit like me and avoided the Iliad for fear of not really being its target audience. Why should we read the Iliad, and what does it take for one to fall in love with a war poem? The horror of my death is near me now, not far away, and there is no way out. The gods who used to be so kind to me, who helped me in the past, and now my doom has come at last, but never let me die without a struggle or without a claim. So let's talk about the historical context of this book, because that is important. I've done a whole video about if the Trojan War was real, which you can check out there, so I won't go into that here. However, let's talk entirely about the poem. This 15,000-line poem would have been recited from memory, orally, around 2,500 years ago. And yet, here it is, right here in front of us. Well, this is one version that existed. There were many versions of the Iliad that existed, because as we know, there's no original myth. The singers of the Iron Age knew many stories, and each bard played with the confines of the stories, in the same way we still do today with the retellings of the Greek myths, for example, or fairy tales, or even stories of contemporary fiction and plays. The variations between these versions of the Iliad may have altered the story wildly. There may have been versions where Achilles was killed by Hector, or others where Patroclus lived and also Paris lived. Now, we could probably argue that those wouldn't have been the Iliad had they been that version and they'd taken those liberties, but we'll never know what liberties certain ancient performers took. All we really know, truly, is this version right here, the one which only existed in fragments of papyri when scholars of the ancient Alexandrian library worked tirelessly over years and years to produce canonical versions of texts which survived long enough for medieval scribes to copy, and then for contemporary translators such as Fagles and Wilson to translate for us. Naturally, the oral heritage of the poem explains why many features of it may feel jarring to modern readers at first, such as the repetition of adjectives and details about particular characters, such as the son of Atreus or swift-footed Achilles. But such formulations were essential to help orators memorise such long poems, and they also served as memory joggers for audience members listening, who wouldn't have had the privilege of being able to flick back a few pages to remind themselves of who was who. There's also a repetition of tropes for the exact same reason, ease of performance, and also there are some rather nonsensical imageries such as swift ships which have been docked for 10 years, but again they helped the bard remember the story. And while such details may seem like errors in creativity to modern readers, they're actually fascinating insights into the methodologies of ancient oral history, and they actually reveal more about the production and the performers, who will always be a mystery to us, than any other contemporary novel will tell us about the workings of a writer. So, for a poem that's all about rage, I would say it's actually incredibly sad, profound and exhilarating in parts. For example, the scene that pops to most of our minds, and particularly myself, is the scene where we see a father and a husband say goodbye to his family, whilst his wife pleads at him, begs him not to leave her a widow and their child an orphan, respectively. We see pride destroy the ties and kill men. We see friendship, honour and triumph and loss clash against one another like raindrops in a storm. Now obviously in a war there should be good guys and bad guys, but we see through this poem the complexity of morality, the senselessness of war, and the humanness of great heroes, who are all heroes to those they fight for, and monsters and enemies to those they fight against. But before I go a little bit further, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Coopert. Coopert is a free extension designed to save money while shopping online effortlessly. Used by over 6 million people on desktop, Coopert is supported on Chrome, Edge, Opera, Firefox and Safari, and works with over 200,000 merchants globally to bring you the best deals and savings. It's super easy to use. Simply install the extension, register an account, browse a website and click the Coopert extension button at the checkout page. One website I've used a lot, more than I like to admit, is World of Books, which is a second-hand book website. So I had a bit of a nose to see if Coopert worked there, and it did. There are lots of deals on the website already, so I selected a few books that I could see that didn't have deals, and then I asked Coopert at the checkout to see if there were coupons, and it did. It saved me £2 on the selection. Coopert also supports cashback from over 76,000 retailers, including Walmart, Sephora, and from personal experience, Jellycat, which is where I purchased my partner a birthday present, and B&Q, from when we were buying things online for DIY for the new flat. It also has a price comparison service on websites such as Nike, Walmart, and Amazon, where that scours the internet to make sure you're getting the best deal on the item you're considering, which in my case was a computer cushion, because that's an example of the exciting things I look at online. And Coopert told me that I could get it much cheaper over on eBay. The cashback system usually takes around 15 days to process and can be redeemed via gift card, PayPal or your bank account. So if you're interested in saving money online, check out my link in the description box down below to check out Coopert yourself as an extension or app. Naturally, we as readers learn more about the Greeks and the Trojan because they're the people we're supposed to be rooting for. But this is quite an anti-war poem about war, and many of us can't deny that our favourite characters tend to be Trojans. I mean, from my own personal experience at least, I love Hector. And whilst it technically sounds less mythic than the Odyssey, where there are monsters, well, the monsters are rather contained to human and godlike forms. The Iliad, however, is no less mythologically potent. The poem is a culmination of dozens of mythic arcs, from prophecies to mythological weapons and lineages. We know the strength and rage of Achilles long before he is born thanks to a prophecy from Prometheus. The war began due to a golden apple being tossed into the wedding of Achilles' mother, Thetis and Peleus, over which Aphrodite, Athena and Hera fought. Bribed by Aphrodite with a beautiful woman called Helen, Paris judged Aphrodite worthy of the golden apple, and that judgment resulted in a 10-year war, which lasts until the Greeks realise that they are prevented from taking Troy lest they take the bow of Heracles. As you can see, the mythology is less about monsters and it's rather more subtle, but mythology is nonetheless intrinsic to the tapestry of this text. But I think one of the biggest reasons why I believe the Iliad spoke to me was because whilst war is central to the poem, it really centres on another question, which stretches beyond the visuals of politics of warfare. The question is one we've all asked ourselves at some point in our lives, usually unconsciously, whether we're soldiers or civilians, men, women, non-binaries, whatever our race, sexuality or background. How are we supposed to grapple with and respond to the fact that we're going to die? The fact that we're going to die is the message from the beginning of the poem. The very central hero, Achilles, was brought into this world on a prophecy of death. He is born knowing that he has only two choices in life. He can choose between a short and glorious life or a long, uneventful one. As such, the reader knows that the war hinges on a man's death, but also on his pride. The opening of the poem focuses on the humiliation of Achilles, which subsequently brings the Greeks' downfall. When Agamemnon steals Achilles' female captive, Briseis, no amount of traditional compensation can undo the damage of the wrath he causes. Agamemnon tries to return this untouched woman along with other spoils, but Achilles refuses, as the damage of his humiliation and the dishonouring of his sacrifice as a warrior is too great a wound to be undone so simply. Quote, "Not even if his gifts could match the grains of dust and sand, not even then would Agamemnon ever sway my heart." Now, whilst later writers have attempted to amend the imagery of Briseis as such, in the Iliad, Briseis is a symbol of Achilles' honour for risking his life, and in stealing her from him, Agamemnon violates his rights and the symbol of his martial success, effectively denying it, in the same way one would if they took away a medal or a trophy. Still, as the poem moves on and Achilles takes time away from the battle, he realises the futility of it all, the meaninglessness of trophies and material goods. There is nothing which can compensate him and others for the price they pay in battle. Quote, "You can raid fine cattle or well-fed sheep, and you can trade to get tripods and horses with fine golden manes. But human life does not come back again after it passes through the fence of teeth. No trade or wrestling can recover it." In Wilson's beautiful translation, we see a poignant analogy for fencing in value. Prized cattle are fenced in, but our breath is fenced in by little more than just teeth, and nothing can recover that spirit once it has escaped its pen. Naturally, the readers of the Iliad are confronted with many gruesome examples of how one might die. It is a war, after all, with Achilles being the most ruthless and inhumane slaughterer. But it is through the death of mortals such as Hector that we truly see the cogs turn inside, as he realises that death will be inevitable, no matter how much he may run or hide, and as such he chooses to live and die greatly. Yet the drive for kleos, honour, drives warriors further and further to demonstrate their superiority amongst one another, thus meaning there is a mental war within the camps in a bloody battle. Each warrior in a camp wishes to outperform his peers. This endless tension of competitiveness and cyclical nature of war is a painful one. Quote, "On every side men shouted out in agony and triumph, killing and being killed. The earth was flooded with blood." And above all this, the gods played their part, plotting and favouring and sabotaging when they see fit. So if you are a first-time reader, I'm going to assume that based on this you don't read ancient Greek, because if you do, fantastic, read away. But for those of us who don't, let's talk about translations and how to read the Iliad. Now, does any translation do the ancient Greek justice? Well, from what I've heard of other people who read fluently in ancient Greek, no. But that doesn't mean it's not worth reading in translation. Each work of translation is a work of art in itself, and as it's an incredibly difficult text to translate, the translations vary pretty wildly. Some use archaic language and others use modern. Similarly, they change in sentence structure, rhyme, levels of artistic license employed, line adherence, vocabulary choices, etc. For example, let's compare the opening line to some of the translations. Alexander Pope's translation opens with thus: "Achilles' wrath to Greece the direful spring of woes unnumbered, heavenly goddess, sing." Samuel Butler's, on the other hand, says, "Sing, O goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus." Evie Rieu opens with, "The wrath of Achilles is my theme, that fatal wrath." Fagles opens with, "Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles." Caroline Alexander's goes, "Wrath, sing, goddess, of the ruinous wrath of Peleus' son Achilles." And Emily Wilson's opens with, "Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus." As you can see, they vary wildly, and you would have to have a nosy at different translations to see which one appeals to you. The first translation I ever read was Fagles, and it's still really sort of my favourite for that reason, but what I love about Wilson's version of it is the accessibility in her text. Most editions, feature maps and things like that, so you can see where they're talking about it, but her edition, which I love, not only has the maps included, but also the genealogies, which is really useful when they may refer to a character as son of Atreus instead of using their name, and instead of having to remember who that is, there are genealogies in the back with family trees so you can follow the plot. Similarly, this edition also has an extensive footnotes, glossary, an introduction which is fantastic as well, so it's a really useful one. And I know that the Norton critical editions of the Odyssey exist. I think the Iliad one is coming out later this year, which goes into more depth with more notes by Wilson, and I always recommend the Norton critical anthologies for anyone who really wants to learn a lot about a text whilst you're reading it, but it's also just an enjoyable reading experience for the general reader. So if you don't need to go that much in depth, then this is a really great edition, as is Fagel's edition. So this is my wee little old one here with all my little notes in, but Fagel's I also really enjoyed. So these are my two favourites. A lot of translations are personal choice, so have a nosy at your local library. Also, you can look in your local bookshop online. Sometimes Google Books also shows you the opening of a lot of books. Not all of it, but sometimes they do. Some of them obviously are part of the Project Gutenberg, which is an online resource for books that are now out of copyright. Pope and Samuel Butler's will be available on there, so you can have a read online for free and see if you like the archaic language or if you'd rather stick to a more modern translation. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing and leaving a comment. People have asked me to do more introductions to older texts, and I wanted to start with the Iliad because I thought it was really worthwhile. Thank you so much, as always, to all of my patrons for being so supportive. And thank you to my top tier patrons, my librarians, Janice Kitchen in a Bowl, Eric Taylor, Andrea Bazil, Fritz Anderson, Marina, Wee Lauren, Nicholas Reed, Jenny Edivane, and Psycho Teddy, Josh. I will leave a link to all my other channels and my podcast in the description box down below for you to browse. I'm on other social medias as well, so check me out there. Thank you as always, and I hope you are happy and healthy. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.